There we go, and we're live. Yay. Should I start with the intro so long? I think so. If there are people that join late, they can catch the recording afterwards. Okay, cool. So I'm going to quickly just open up. Thanks, Schalk and John, for joining me today. Just a quick intro about ZAP. So ZAP is our short word for South African product design. Community is a couple of years old. Between LinkedIn and meetup.com and Slack, we're about 2,800 members strong, trying to grow the community still. It's kind of born out of a place of frustration, to be honest, because there was no community in Cape Town, Joburg, or South Africa for product design specifically. So I reached out to a couple of people in the industry, and yeah, we've been running ever since. So that's just a little about Zapped. The URL is zapped.co.za if you want to join. Kind of do a quick check, and then we add people to the community. Yeah, and then just a quick shout out to our sponsors. You will see in the corner of this presentation, there's FETSA. FETSA is Front End Development South Africa. There we go, Zapped on there now. But what I was meaning to say is that FETSA shares some of their platforms and things with us, so we don't pay for two accounts. So yeah, thank you. Schalk is also from FETSA, and Justin, who isn't here today. We've been walking a long road with them. Then we've got IO. IO is the company that I work for, io.co.za. I did a quick little synopsis of what we do, but I don't think you can with so little words say how much we actually do. But we predominantly build products and startups. We do some innovations, and of course, based on that, we do complete custom development and design for all the products that we build. Justin, who isn't here today, he's from a company called NML. NML is a specialist financial services software development company. We've got Code Capsules. They're a platform as a service platform for mean development teams. I don't know if anybody wants to explain mean. I'm not going to, but the developers aren't actually mean. It's a specific stack. And yeah, that's our sponsors. And then we want to say welcome and thank you to John van Schalkwyk. He's currently at Life Healthcare, and he specializes in service and interaction design. John has extensive experience crafting seamless digital experience across diverse industries, including chemical engineering, healthcare, and telecommunications. He has a background in computer science and excels at translating complex development challenges into simplified, intuitive designs. Ensuring synergy between design and development. Very fancy way of saying a lot of things, but I met John today for the first time. I can tell he's very kind, very compassionate, and also very passionate about the industry that he works in. I don't know if it's big enough for people to see, but his LinkedIn.com profile is there. It's just / John van Schalkwyk. And he gave me permission to put a photo and his LinkedIn URL there if you want to contact him directly. And yeah, I don't know what else to say, John. I'm hoping you're going to say a little bit about yourself as well.
Cool. Thank you so much, Liesl. Thanks, Schalk. Awesome. Hi, everyone.
Sorry, just before we start, when you comment on YouTube, you can ask questions or leave comments. And if it's relating to what John is talking about, we might stop and address it, but we'll see how it goes. Otherwise, we'll do a little Q&A at the end of John's talk. Sorry, John. Now the floor is yours.
No worries. Awesome. Thank you so much, Liesl. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. As Liesl mentioned, I'm a service and interaction designer, and I'm really, really passionate when it comes to inclusive design. And I feel in a lot of the cases, this is something that we all know we should be doing, but we don't always have the time or the budget to give it the necessary amount of attention. And so hopefully what I'm trying to achieve through tonight's talk is actually just demonstrating that there's a whole bunch of things that we can actually do in our day-to-day lives, which makes this topic a little bit more easy to understand and actually implement it into our day-to-day really seamlessly. Cool, I just want to confirm my screens are up. Yes, they are. Cool. Okay, and yeah, as Liesl mentioned, as questions come through, pop them through, and I will try and address them as they come. So for this huge and complex topic called inclusive design, actually, let's start just thinking about a little bit what it symbolizes and what it's about, right? So this is a beautiful quote. It's a gentlest whisper of empathy, a language of touch that speaks to the hearts of all, ensuring that no one feels excluded from the symphony of life's experiences. And I know it's like a lot of big words, but essentially it's really touching to understand that this whole topic is about how do we make people feel included, and how do we make sure that it's not this facetious high level, I've ticked a box and people are included, but it's generally these feelings of I feel seen, I was valued, I felt heard in this experience, right? That's the goal that we're trying to achieve through inclusive design. So then we take a step back, right? And we look, how do we as humans usually solve these problems? And that's a big one, because if we look at humans, our perceptions and our biases are the things that shape our worldview, right? So the influence designs and the choices that we make, it's all unconscious because it's constructed out of a subset of the things that make us who we are and where we've come from. So when we start looking at these truly inclusive products, there's this whole range of human diversity that we need to start embracing. And that's physical, cognitive, emotional, all the way through to disabilities, impairments, and limitations, right? It sometimes requires us to kind of like take the day-to-day blinkers off that we see the world through and actually start experiencing, in some cases, not the most comfortable topics to talk about or not the most comfortable problems that we need to solve for, right? We actually look at people who are, in some cases, worse off than us, or in some cases where they don't have the abilities that we take for granted, right? So by embracing this human diversity, we actually have the benefit of creating user-friendly solutions for a wider audience, and it improves that user satisfaction and the market reach that we're actually essentially designing for. So who do we design for, right? We've all heard this term. No, we design for the human, the user, we're user-centric. What's that word actually mean, right? Because if we think about it, the profile of user or human is like, it's a vastly different picture that we see from one person to another, right? So inherent biases in the design of our products, of our processes, and these biases carry through when we speak about user, because we're generalizing. We're like, no, but people in general do it this way, or the user will understand, or it's applicable to this user group. So when we take these high level assumptions, stereotypes, whatever word you want to use to describe it, and essentially try and put people on a bell curve, that essentially suggests that there's the stereotypical person, the stereotypical user that we design for. But the actual essence of this is, when it comes to people, there's no such thing as normal, right? When we design for people, we really need to take things into consideration: age, gender, language skills, your technological proficiency, your physical abilities, where you come from, your culture, right? All these things shape what this general understanding of the user actually is. So the things that influence our interactions, right? It's all influenced by what we hear, what we see, what we say, and what we touch. So these are all things, and if like, I wanted to say effects. These are all items, actions, interactions that we actually go through every single day. So when we talk about hearing, sound can convey a wide range of information, from the spoken language to environmental cues. So in conversation, hearings allow us to detect the nuances of speech, such as intonation and emphasis, which change the meaning of words and the way that we interact with things, right? So how do we capture this when we design for? Seeing, again, visual design elements like color, layout, typography, imagery, all these things in a product can greatly affect the experience and usability of. Same for saying and same for touching. So when we talk about touching, right, the tactile feel of a button or haptic feedback on a touchscreen when I'm working with it. So you see all these are transferable into these so-called designs or solutions that we cater for in this generic example of what we call a user. But when we actually start breaking them down, we actually see that they've got a whole lot of nuances that we actually can experience and play with and understand a bit better. and transfer these over to a broader audience. So why does inclusion design matter, or inclusive design? So when we prioritize inclusivity in our designs, we're basically removing barriers, and we're allowing a broader audience to access and use our products. So this doesn't mean I'm going to create one solution that fits all. This is more about creating different avenues for this same task to be completed, but there's different ways of approaching it and different ways of getting to that end result. It's actually nuancing and creating those options instead of forcing someone down a predetermined path. So by embracing this inclusivity, we create a level playing field where all users are treated as equals. That's the big part. All users, even the ones that are difficult to design for, even the ones who we don't always take the time to understand the limitations, all these users are treated as an equal, and they deserve an equal opportunity to embrace and make use of the service or product we're creating. So a good example is on Google Maps, where there's a wheelchair accessibility feature. So you can actually go onto the app, you can see which routes I can take and which are wheelchair friendly. That took a whole lot of additional design, time, research that was put into that, for what someone can argue was a smaller subset of users. Why do we need to spend this time to do this? But that's actually a really important part of when inclusivity plays a role. It's taking that time out of this generalized norm to service a demographic or group that doesn't usually get that attention, or it makes it difficult for them to use our products or our services. There's also OXO Good Grips. So it's a kitchen towel brand and was designed on the principle using universal design. So the owner, or the founder thereof, noticed that his wife was struggling with conventional kitchen towels, right? Again, something so simple in our day-to-day usage, a kitchen towel, ripping it off and wiping something. His wife had arthritis, and she was struggling to actually grip these and pull these paper sheets apart. And that's where we came up with a design that actually makes it easy for someone with these limitations to make use of that product as well. So it's really, really fine-tuning into these smaller things that able-bodied people or our general norm, when we talk about that, take for granted, but we actually need to take that step back and fine-tune and zoom into what are these smaller things that we can actually do that make a difference. So a lot of words and a lot of sentences, right, and concepts, but if we start summarizing that, what exactly is this concept called inclusive design? And if we actually start to break down the meaning of the word inclusive, right? Inclusive design acknowledges multiple ways to achieve the same goal. Everyone's experience in this matters. When we create inclusive spaces, we ensure that everyone can choose how they complete tasks, and we avoid making people feel left out or marginalized. And that's a very big thing, and it's a difficult complexity when we look at timelines and budgets and all these big things that come into the encompassing view of creating products, right? But it's really trying to not step into these biases of, oh, I find this easy to do. Oh, it's easy for me to complete this task. Everyone must find it easy to do this, right? It's actually actively fighting those little voices that we hear, or we'll deep dive into that a little bit later, but it's basically a whole bunch of biases that play a role. And some of them are so unconscious. There's even a category unconscious bias that we do these things without even realizing we're doing it. So when we create these multiple pathways, it's not about finding one perfect solution, but by building multiple pathways, recognizing the differences as a source of innovation. So again, when we look at our country and the history of our country and the way we've been formed as people, right? Sometimes we really do shy away of talking about things that make us different, talking about the things that make us stand apart. But it's actually those kind of conversations, those tough conversations. It's cultivating those safe spaces where we can have these conversations, talk about why I'm different, what makes me different, what my culture says about me, what my language dictates about me, my background, where I come from. All these things are super, super valuable aspects that we actually use to understand the people we design for and truly embrace this concept of universal, human-centric design that's actually putting people in the middle of that and not just saying we're doing that. So what are the goals of inclusive design? And I love this image because it's like a sprinkle. It takes a whole bunch of sprinkles to make this work, right? And this ice cream is only fantastic because it's embraced all these different sprinkles. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with inclusive design, right? Every single human is a sprinkle that needs to be represented, or at least we try our utmost best to represent them in a way that's equal for them to access. So including everyone in this design process, but especially those who have been excluded in the past or have been marginalized. So every person experiences moments of temporary and situational disability. We'll go into that a little bit later. But what does this tell us, right? It tells us that at any point, we are also people who can fall victim to a disability or an exclusive environment, right? And by adapting a broader perspective, we can understand people's behaviors and situations and understand and enable us to design with greater care and thoughtfulness so that we try and mitigate these moments, whether they be temporary or situational, of exclusion, to say, oh, actually, if it were yesterday and I didn't fall and break my arm, I would have been able to use this product so easily. But today, my situation is different. I've got a temporary disability, but yet still it's easy for me to make use of this product, right? It's from instances like those where life changes, but still our product or solution is accessible, right? And like essentially our mission is creating an inclusive world for everyone. I stole this image right in the corner here from some Salesforce training because I thought it was really a fantastic way of describing this, right? So in our minds, when we think disability, it's personal health conditions, right? Something happened that makes me a bit different. I can't do it the same as again, this general topic of normal human can do. We need to start thinking about disability as a mismatched human interaction. So what does this mean? It makes it approachable and applicable to every single one of us because we can find ourselves in that position of disability as well. So we can't talk about inclusion if we don't talk about accessibility, right? So while our goal is to focus on making design accessible by embracing diversity and providing flexible solutions, it's also critical to understand how accessibility fits into this picture. Accessibility talks about making things available to as many people as possible. So we're providing our flexible solutions, we're embracing diversity, but we also need to understand that accessibility is that key component of inclusivity. So inclusive design as a method uses accessibility to achieve this. So this is the vehicle to say, I'm making this more accessible, but thus I'm trying to achieve a little bit more inclusivity. But we do need to not fall into the trap and think just because something is accessible does not mean it's inclusive, right? So accessibility and inclusive design must go hand in hand because they're both tools used to enhance one another. And true openness requires both these elements working seamlessly. So when we take the dive into the principle of inclusive design, right? And I really love this image because it shows how do we deep dive into the minds of people to make them feel part of a greater. We can't talk about inclusivity, accessibility, and all these things if we don't understand what exclusion is. So exclusion occurs when we approach problem solving through our own biases, resulting in a form of participation disability. Again, disability is a big word that comes up here. So it implies that being left out, right, when we're not included in a conversation, when we can't make use of a product as easily as everyone else, sometimes these little voices go, oh, there's something wrong with me. I'm not going to talk about this, but I feel it's very difficult to engage with this, right? And sometimes we hide these feelings. But something that's universally agreeable, whether inclusion looks different for me than what it looks for anyone else, right? But if there's a feeling we can all relate to, even if it comes in a different form, we all know what it feels like to be excluded in a situation, right? And it's that energy that we create there, or that understanding, that feeling of marginalization, of segregation, however which form it may be that you felt this form of exclusion, that is the trigger that we can use to be like, I felt this way. I don't want to feel this way again. I want to try and make a better world where other people don't feel this way as well. What can I do to actually make a difference? So exclusion results then from the interaction between an individual's abilities and a societal structure. No, but everyone understands it this way, or no, but this is how it should be working, right? It's fighting that contrast that's been created. And sometimes we really need to recognize these are boxes that were created by people that don't necessarily understand the box that they're creating, but yet we govern our society around these fictitious boxes. So exclusion can also be temporary. So that's arising from a short-term challenge, or it could be situational, caused by environmental factors. We're going to go into a persona spectrum a little bit later, and that's when we can see how we can use these different situations to actually design for a greater goal. So how do we combat exclusion? We employ inclusive design at the intersect of an individual's capabilities and these societal structures. So how do we see what can this human do, or where's the problem aspect, ability that this human is struggling with, or subset of humans? What is the task at hand? How do we bridge this and make it accessible to them? There's this lovely thing called the cycle of exclusion. And it's also a framework we can use to try and catch ourselves in the early phases to not give way to these biases or ways of thinking, or maybe it's just the way that we understand and see the world, right? This framework helps in identifying mismatches and habits that perpetrate exclusion by examining the motivations, methods, and assumptions of designers. So this is directly where we're speaking about designers, right? We are positioned in such a way that our work actually impacts a whole lot of people, which means as long as, and it's with great power comes great responsibility. And this is exactly one of those instances where we use this framework to actually make sure that we are imposing the best design and we're challenging and actively questioning the biases or imposed structures around us. So why are we making this thing, right? What's the motivations? Profit, market demand, personal biases. What influenced us in creating the solution? Who's making it, right? So now we ask, okay, the people crafting the solution, what do they look like? Are they diverse? Do we have diversity in the design process where people can come from different parts and actually question this or explain this? Or is it being created in a very marginalized view of this is how it is and this is how it will be? Now we're looking at how it's being made, right? So we're assessing the inclusivity of the design methods, tools, and resources. So what are we using to create this? Are we actually imposing some structure around here that helps us question these biases? Who's going to use it? Again, are we assuming abilities? Are we assuming preferences? Are we assuming the context in which a human will be using this? Or are we trying to create that broader perspective where anyone can make use of this? And what are we making? We're focusing on creating accessible and usable end products, right? So we need to always keep that at goal. As much as the service we're creating is important, how that is being delivered and the accessibility that comes with that is also important, because also if you create something that's inclusive and accessible, more people can make use of this. When we start speaking business value, that's a bigger user base, that's a larger profit margin, right? So all of those things play a role too if you need to businessify this. But at the end of the day, you also need to have that guiding compass of, I really want to make a difference about how things always have been. I don't want to fall into this trap of we do it this way because we've always done it this way. I actually want to start challenging and questioning these norms. How do we do all of this, right? We need to learn and embrace diversity. It should be something that, oh my goodness, this is a topic that I'm not familiar with, or ooh, this topic questions something about how I understand the world. Let's not shy away from that. Let's actually, in a safe environment, there's the phrase safe environment, start engaging on these topics and understanding why. Why does this make me feel different? Why does this make me feel uncomfortable? How do you see this? How do people around me perceive this problem? That's how we grow. And when we start embracing these different viewpoints and we don't switch and fall into this bias called confirmation bias. We'll go into that a bit later. So how do we describe and define this thing called diversity? And Frida Kahlo is like the queen of diversity. Like, I just love this woman to bits. And in her quote, I am my own muse. I'm the subject I know best. The subject I want to know better, right? This is every single human around you. We all pay so much attention on how we see the world and what's important to us and how we want to embrace something, or what are the things that make us furious if it's not there? What are the things that we love when they're there? So we're all these subject matter experts about the experiences that we deem great. We need to start sharing that and actually embracing these different views. So that's how you can learn from the people around you. And that doesn't need to be the user base that's in the town over door, like in the next town, or the human that's sitting in the department 7 floors below me. We can start that by our family, our friend circles. We can really start these in intimate groups and actually grow this muscle to actually start having these diversity like conversations. So it's essentially about recognizing that each of us is unique and we need to start treasuring these differences. What are some of the things that we are different, right? We're different on race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, physical abilities, religion, politics, personal beliefs. This list can grow, right? And we all have a different subset and mix of all of these, which still makes us a bit different in that because we have a different intersect of all these things. It encourages us to open these conversations about these differences. And we need to make sure, again, it's in a safe and positive environment. It's truly connecting with one another and moving beyond mere tolerance and celebrating the incredible richness that each Black person brings. The big word here is beyond mere tolerance. Let's try and move away from just tolerating something and actually being like, I'm not just going to accept this as is. I actually want to understand why you feel this way or what makes you think in this way. That's how we start growing this. And you see, it doesn't need to be something that we've scoped into a project that, guys, right, we're going to tick this little box. We've spent 2 days talking about inclusive and accessible design. We've done this in our product. That is not inclusion. But these kind of things that we bake into our day-to-day lives starts to grow these muscles and actually understanding the people, the area, the culture, the environment that we are designing for. So what drives all of these feelings, and what's that big emotion that's actually our superpower that helps us do this? Empathy and what it's all about, right? So then we read our Merriam-Webster definition that uses all these big fancy words, but essentially it's understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, experiencing feelings, thoughts, and the experiences of another, whether that be in the present or past, without having these feelings, thoughts, and experience fully communicated in an objective and explicit manner. Cool. So what's all these big words mean? It means that empathy is the ability to emotionally understand what others are experiencing and to see the world through their eyes and put yourself in their shoes. It doesn't mean you have to come from that culture, that background, that language, that situation, that disability. But it means that we're actively engaging in understanding what that human goes through, what the process is around their day-to-day life, and actually how this thing that affects them makes them do things differently or limits them in doing certain things. So empathic design caters for the real user's needs rather than the supposed averages, right? I hate that when we say, no, we've designed for the average user. There's really no such thing. As a designer, it's important to distinguish between what people say they would do in certain situations and what they actually do. There's the big thing. What I say I'm doing, and especially when we start looking at shadowing and when we do research, right? When I'm hovering over your shoulder and I'm like staring at every single thing you're doing, you're not going to be authentic in your interactions because you know someone's watching you, right? So it's creating these environments where we observe, but we don't also create the stigma around you being observed. That's when we start uncovering the difference between what I say I'm going to do and what I'm actually going to do. So here's a big one: empathy versus compassion. So compassion is fueled by understanding and accepting that we are all made of strength and struggle. No one is immune to pain or suffering. Compassion is not a practice of I'm better than or I can fix you. It's a practice based in the beauty and pain of shared humanity. So I really recommend every single designer go read Brené Brown's work. She has this way of really explaining these complex topics of emotions that we deal with. And remember, when we design, we're designing for humans who experience these emotions. But even above that, understanding how you feel about a certain situation, that you can start unpacking your biases that you design with. So it's a daily commitment when we say we're compassionate. It's the skill of acknowledging shared humanity, right? Leading us to treat both ourselves and others with loving kindness and inspiring us to take action when we're confronted with suffering. But when we talk about compassion, empathy, there's a word sympathy that we all understand and know as well. Like, we all have heard the word, but do we know what's the actual difference between sympathy and empathy? Because sympathy has the ability to lead us down a negative path instead of actually leading us towards the empathetical path. So let's break down sympathy and make it a bit simple to understand. Sympathy involves sharing someone else's feelings. It is often accompanied by sadness of their misfortune or something's happened, right? I can speak like it's. So for example, let's say you've recently come across someone who's been retrenched. The sympathetical response could be, that's horrible. But in the back of your mind, when you have, oof, that's so bad, but I'm so glad that wasn't me. I'm feeling so lucky that I wasn't the one that was selected. That's sympathy playing out there. Empathy is, that is horrible. I can just imagine what's happening in your family right now. You're stressing about your finances, and I can feel this fear and emotion around you. So sympathy can spark the empathetic response, but if we like only approach this with a, I'm so glad I'm not you, that's us not being inclusive and accessible when we design. So we need to really hone our understanding of what sympathy is and actually look out for these sympathy triggers, because sympathy also goes in hand with pity and sorrow, right? Pity can be seen as the feeling when you witness a misfortune and suffering with someone who's worse off than you. Very big sentence, they're worse off than you, because that's already mean you're in the mindset of, I'm higher, I'm better, I'm bigger, I'm stronger. That happened to you, shame on you, it's not me. we've already created a distance between our actual user base and understanding this human and the way that we understand it around us, right? So to practice genuine empathy, we should harness our sympathy as a catalyst. So pick up on the, ooh, something's wrong, yeah? I'm feeling this feeling. I'm glad it's not me, which is, it's okay to acknowledge that as well, right? That is a human response, but we shouldn't let it stop there. We should go, okay, this isn't me that's affected, but one day this could be me that's affected. I'm not immune to this happening to me as well. How do I actually deep dive and understand this and like feeling, fear, emotion, translate this into a way that this human can actually make use of it as well in a positive light, instead of just saying, phew, dodge that bullet, don't have to care. So here's when we start looking at bias and empathy, right? Sympathy can start playing a role in this way that we see these biased views. There's a whole bunch of different biases. These are just some of them, right? So when we start unpacking affinity bias, it's our natural tendency to favor people with characteristics we relate to. So I'll always trust people from my hometown. They're just more reliable than like-minded. It's a trigger, right? We need to look up, like, if we catch ourselves in any of these instances, we're like, I'm being biased right now, which means I'm not actually objectively looking at this. I'm looking at it with blinders and blinkers on. I need to try and catch myself and take these blinkers off. Confirmation bias is something we all fall into, and it's a very comfortable bias to resort back into. We only seek information that confirms our beliefs. We ignore any counter evidence. If I need to make a pitch, or I have a great idea for an app, or the screen's layout just looks so fantastic because I've used this pattern, and I read this one article back in 2001 and it confirms this is the way to go, and nothing else matters, that's a form of confirmation bias. Like, I knew it. It confirms everything I've been saying about climate change is another good example. I knew I was right all along. And we forget all about these contrasting opinions. And the tip that we can do with this is, like, actually seek out information that challenges your existing beliefs. Like, go and look for the stuff that proves you wrong and see if you can actually find some evidence that you've actually built out and expanded the way that you see the solution, instead of just choosing the first thing you see blindly, because it sort of relevantly confirms what you're thinking. Benevolence bias is assuming we know what's the best for others based on a desire to help. Big trap that we as designers fall into, right? Because our day-to-day life is about, no, but I'm designing solutions for people. I'm helping people. I know this works best for them. It's the pattern. It's been researched. That's the best way to do this. Assuming we know what's best for others without actually engaging with them, asking them, testing it with them, ensuring that it's not a biased view that we've taken on this based on our abilities, based on the circles and cultures we're around. Is it easy for us to understand? No, everyone should understand this, engage with it, right? We need to guard ourselves against that. Good example as well as English being the business language of this country, but we've got so many other different languages. And something that I face in the healthcare sector as well is, no, but we have educational material on this. It's in English, it's for everyone to understand. And I'm like, yes, but Magogo, who speaks isiZulu and like uses English as self-defense only when she needs to, how does she understand her diagnosis in her condition if it's not in a language that she understands and feels comfortable with, right? Then recency and availability effect. So I'm basing judgments on recent and readily available information. Again, see how closely this goes to confirmation bias. It's easy for me to get, I've heard about this recently, it must be true. It's top of mind in our memory. Again, take that step back, look at a long-term view. Data plays a big role here. What is the data projecting? What are the things and trends that we can see that comes out of a longer span of time, instead of just looking at the last 6 months, last year? Think about how AI has changed in this like 2-year space, right? Self-rater bias, underplaying or overplaying our achievements due to personal or cultural reasons. I'm pretty much the best player on our team. I score the most points every day. I'm the best designer. I've got the greatest projects. Everyone raves about me. I'm the best person to solve this problem because I've got so many years of experience in this, or I've got so many degrees at stake. I'm so smart. We need to catch ourselves when we fall into that trap as well. We need to seek feedback, actively go out and ask people what they think. And that's also a muscle we need to practice, right? Because most of the time when we go and ask people their opinions, everyone has a different opinion. Everyone has a different view of how this works. And sometimes they may be directly in contrast about how you see the world. The superpower here is actually taking that as positive critique and growing from it, and not getting defensive and shutting down when these things happen. A lot of the time that can mean your design that you've been spending, or your product that you've been spending months on to perfect, and you're so proud of this thing. and you found out there's a group of users that have a specific like disability, whether that be temporal, physical, or situational. Now they can't make use of your product. Now you have to rethink these patterns you're so proud of, right? It takes a lot of understanding yourself and regulating your own emotions when you start talking about inclusivity, right? It's a lot of the senses, it's this charity starts at home. So we really need to spend that time in understanding ourselves as humans, the traps that we fall into and the biases that we carry before we extend these to the people around us. Then there's a biggie, right? And this one is a very big one in our country, structural bias. Influence of cultural norms and underwritten rules and opinions of decisions, right? Plays a large role in how we see this like social construct around us, how things work around us. And even though that, yes, we can't take away the fact that there sometimes are some structural limitations, or there sometimes are some boxes that people force us into, we still need to have that vulnerability and courage to step outside of that and question it in a way to, I'd like to understand how you feel about this box. I'd like to understand how you would engage with this a little bit differently. And it's actually coming out of these so-called comfort zones that we create for ourselves within these structural limitations that are imposed around us. That's where the courage to stand out and actually perfect inclusive and accessible designs come from. So now we might be thinking, okay, cool, we've heard all about these inclusive trends and we've all learned about accessibility and we know what exclusion looks like, but how do I know I'm empathetic? Or what are the things that I need to look at to understand if I'm actually empathetic in my choices? Am I a monster that just doesn't feel this, or do I actually do this already, right? So what are some of the signs that we can look at to show that you tend to be an empathetic human? Active listening, it's a big one, right? You genuinely listen to what others are saying without interrupting or forming responses. You actively engaging in that content, then you take your time to reflect and you respond. You don't already think about your response when someone's speaking to you. So what do those sound like? I'm here to listen. Please go through and ahead and share your thoughts and feelings, right? When we're testing solutions, when we're testing ideas, when we're iterating on product constructs, actually taking this in and listening to what people want and need. And sometimes you really need to read between the lines with what they're saying again, because also we understand that there are biases and limitations in place and people aren't always 100% themselves when we talk about these things. We need to understand emotions. Can you accurately identify and understand the emotions someone else is expressing? How do we understand other people's emotions? We start to understand our own emotions and recognize what those feelings feel like so that we can see that in other people. It looks like you're really like going through it. I'm here for you. It looks like you're struggling when you're doing this. Are you struggling? How can I assist you with this? It looks like this is something that's difficult for you to do, or you don't really seem that engaged, or it seems to be frustrating you. How do we recognize these emotions that we use then to fine-tune and tweak our solutions so that they actually hit the right emotive expression instead of causing the opposite? Non-judgmental attitude. Again, we need to approach these conversations with an open mind and withhold judgment. Just because I think it's the right way to do does not mean it's the right way to do for everyone. Just because I think it's the best solution doesn't mean everyone else who doesn't do it this way is stupid, right? So you can talk to me without worrying about me judging you. And I'm actually actively listening to how you understand the world around you so that I can incorporate your understanding and not superimpose my understanding. We can offer support. You express your willingness to help and support others when they're facing challenges. And this is also something that really resonates within design teams or organizations, right? It's not this department versus that department or this team versus that team. We're all, like if I have to quote High School Musical, we're all in this together. And we need to really embrace this understanding that, I'm here for you and I'm here to help you. Ask open-ended questions. Don't assume a response or impose a certain feeling or impose a certain action when I'm asking a question. Really try and take that out and remain in a neutral zone when you ask people to engage with you, because then you also haven't planted that seed of a feeling when someone's responding to you. You're actually genuinely hearing from their perspective and their thought processes. And again, validate emotions and feelings. Your feelings are valid. It's okay to be frustrated with this process. It's okay to think this isn't inclusive. It's okay to be angry when you go into your corporate and you try and open the door and you can't because you're in a wheelchair and it isn't automated. It's okay to feel frustrated or left out or marginalized in a situation, right? So those feelings, those expressions, they all give validity to us understanding how all of these things work. So when we're facing empathy and we're staring it right in the eye, what are the different forms of empathy that we can look at? So there's 3 universal ones. There's affective, somatic, and cognitive empathy. So affective empathy is like sharing and experiencing the emotions of another. So essentially feeling with someone. I'm experiencing it with you. I'm understanding it with you. So if we take that into relevance, is while testing a new app, you notice the users becoming frustrated with a complex feature, and you can see they're struggling. You feel that sense of frustration, and you're like, I'm picking up something's not okay here, which triggers us to go and look at the feature. Somatic empathy is a physical response to the emotions another person is feeling. So have you guys ever been in a situation? So for example, I've seen this with some of my mom's friends. She's in a crocheting club. It's very, very youthful of her to have these lovely passions. And there was an older lady sitting there also struggling to crochet. And she's got arthritis in her hands. And you look at that and you feel that tinge in your own hands. And you're like, I can actually feel your struggle. That's a form of somatic empathy. And that's a very powerful one, because it also, in most cases, evokes this feeling of, that feels horrible. Oh, this feels funny. I need to do something about it. I don't want to feel this way. Then we have cognitive empathy. So it's understanding the thoughts and perspectives, emotions of another person on an intellectual level. I'm thinking about how this affects you. I can think that it's frustrating. This is how it should be feel. I'm trying to intellectually gauge what your feeling is in the situation. So imagine navigating a website with a screen reader. That's so I'm able-bodied. I don't have a problem reading or engaging on a screen. Let me actually test the screen reader. Let me put it on. So then the understanding leads me to improve the site's accessibility by adding more descriptive text fields to keyboard navigations, because now when I've run the screen reader, it's so difficult to manage and engage with this. But I would not have known about it if I didn't take this cognitive approach to empathy and actually experience, so a little bit of somatic empathy there as well, taking that over into the cognitive range, inducing me to actually make a difference or change something about this. So now we look at we turn the other way, right? What makes us less empathetic? What takes us away from these? What are these barriers? So our cognitive biases, again, always going to play a big role here. They shape how we see the world and the people around us. And it's a tough one, right? We all come from a whole lot of different backgrounds. We've all heard our parents talk about specific things. Our friend groups have different ways of seeing this, and all of these things form a nice little pair of sunglasses that we view the world around us. And sometimes it's a tough thing for us to actually stop, reflect about how we've seen things. And sometimes we need to be the bigger person to realize, I've actually been thinking about this completely wrong, and I've been imposing a different way of thinking about things, which actually isn't that inclusive. But the secret here is not to fall into the trap and feel paralyzed by it. It's actually something that you can use to be I'm going to make this active difference to not do this again and to not let someone else feel this way. So what does a cognitive bias example look like? If the designer assumes that all the users have the same tech literacy levels as themselves, they might overlook creating intuitive interfaces for beginners, thus failing to empathize with the less tech-savvy users. Another big one, dehumanization. So we often think that people who are different from us, again, what are all those differences we named in the beginning from exclusive perspectives? Race, age, gender, sexual orientation, all these things, right? Just because they're different, we think they feel and act differently to us as well. So it makes us less empathetic immediately, especially if we're not close to their experiences. So what does an example of this look like? A remote development team might ignore the feedback from other users in a different country, assuming their needs and challenges are too different to be relevant. They're so far away, it's a different government, it's a different language, it's a different country, not the same as my struggles, so we don't really need to look at that. That's a form of dehumanization. And then another big one, and a trap we generally tend to fall into, is victim blaming. So we sometimes blame individuals for their own difficulties because we want to believe the world is fair and people get what they deserve. So what does this look like? It's an unconscious effect that happens. And when a user is struggling with a poorly designed feature, you think, they just don't understand how to use it. It's their fault, they're incompetent, rather than actually considering that the design might be flawed and it can lead to this feeling of victim blaming. A nice little tip to practice when this comes up. Studies have indicated that when we try and do something in a rush, or when we are placed under pressure, think about deadlines that are coming up. I have 3 weeks to do this. I have 2 days to send this in. we automatically tend to be less empathetic because there's not time to think and consider all the nice to have soft things. We just need to get this done. So when you find yourself in that trap, you're like, okay, cool. Let's take a breather. Let's think about this objectively. What are we actually designing and doing, and how does this affect the people we're designing for? So how do we practice empathy, right? So we faced it right on. We know effective cognitive and somatic empathy forms are there. We know what the things look like that turns us away from empathy, but how do we put ourselves at the center of this empathy and actually make it about us understanding this better? Acknowledging our biases. Again, acknowledge that we're different, acknowledge that we think different, acknowledge that it's okay to think and feel differently. It's not okay to use that to exclude others. So just because we understand something from our viewpoint, it doesn't automatically apply to the person besides us. And that's a big one, right? Sometimes you might even roll your eyes and be like, but how? How do you not see it this way? I mean, don't you? For example, again, when you look at the political circumstances of this country, people vote for a whole lot of different parties, and everyone's justified to vote for who they believe is going to make the biggest difference. But when we acknowledge our biases, we realize that when someone chooses someone that we don't necessarily align with, now they're an enemy. How can you think that way? That's when we start discussing a project, discussing this thing that's different, and consider how our background influences our perspective around this. And we remain open to these different viewpoints and learning. But why is this important to you? Why do you see it in this way? And let's mutually learn from one another. We need to learn to ask questions sensitively. We don't assume. We never assume. We rather phrase questions in, what's your opinion? I think about it in this way. How do you think about it? How do you see this playing out? What do you think when this happens, right? We're taking ourselves out of the situation because relevantly, we aren't important right now when we're starting to understand how someone else is experiencing about it. And it takes a lot of self-awareness to remove our own biases and our own intersections of what it should be versus how the best usability of this would be, or why it makes business sense, or why this is the best structure to use. We need to actually cut that off and be like, it's not about me, it's about you right now. So instead of assuming why a colleague prefers a particular design approach, ask them to share their thoughts and reasoning, because now we're starting to engage on why it's different, and maybe they have a point that you haven't considered. And again, owning up to that when it happens. And again, always listen actively. When we're listening, we need to do the following. Make eye contact. Don't interrupt someone. Very, very big one here. Only respond with advice when asked. Don't impose your opinion if you aren't asked for it. And take time to think what about is being said. So when we're discussing a feature, or when we're doing a usability test, or when we're talking about the conceptualization of a new product, feature, solution, let's actually think about what we're talking about, thinking about what this actually affects and what downstream effects of this is going to be. And that's how we pivot and enhance and build. So during a team meeting, we focus entirely on the speaker and avoid planning our response. Big one, we don't sit on a Teams call, type our next email. Some of us applying for a new job in the background and sparking up that CV when someone's talking about an important work meeting, right? Having your focus there, actually paying that respect and actively engaging in the conversation. Reflecting back on what we hear. So paraphrase and summarize what the other person has said to show that we're actually engaged, we're actually like mulching over what you've said, we're engaging with it, we're actively thinking about it, and we're clarifying any misunderstandings that show up to this point. So what you're saying is that you feel the current design isn't user-friendly for older adults. Is that correct? Why do you feel this way? Showing genuine interest. Show that you care about the person's experience by expressing genuine curiosity and interest in what they say. Not just, okay, cool, you feel this way, let's go on, right? Like genuinely engaging with where they're coming from and what's influencing this way. So that's a very interesting point. Can you tell me more about where you came to this conclusion, or what helped you form this? And then practicing patience. This is a big one that I need to whisper to myself every day and be like, John, be patient. Not everyone thought about it in this way. Not everyone got to this conclusion immediately. You need to calm down. There's time, listen. So everyone falls into the pitfall with some of these things, right? And none of us are immune to it. That's the beauty of having humans, right? We're all fundamentally broken in some kind of way that makes us special. So we need to give people time and space to express themselves fully. Avoid rushing them, finishing their sentences. Yeah, but I thought you were going to say this. Like cutting all of these out and actually practicing their patience, listening, reflecting back, engaging, and showing them that you're there. It's about them. It's not about me in that instance. So we need to dispel this myth that empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. Rather than walking in your shoes, I need to learn how to listen to the story you tell me about what it's like in your shoes and believe you even when it doesn't match my experiences. That's the big thing. Just because I don't experience it this way does not mean the way that you feel about something, the way that you engage with something isn't valid. So how do we start doing this, right? I have 3 little words that I use: what, how, and why. So understanding what happens to lead to the result. What are the steps that we're taking in this instance? And then we go to the how. How did someone react while performing these steps? What did they do? What were their expressions? What was their mood? Were they like frustrated? Were they excited? Were they confused? Then I go to the why. This is where we start applying a little bit of thinking, where like we make educated guesses based on what we've observed and how that was done. And now we start thinking about, why did these events occur? What happened here? What can I actually change to make a difference? So, some practical examples, right? With user interviews. What? Identify the specific actions the user took during the interaction. How? Observe their emotional and physical responses. Why? Ask follow-up questions to understand their motivations and frustrations. So, during a user interview for a mobile banking app, you ask the user to walk you through the steps they take to transfer money. That's the what. You note their frustration when they reach the confirmation screen. How? Why did you get frustrated? How? What happened? You then ask why this part is frustrating, and the user explains that the process feels too lengthy and confusing, suggesting that they need more streamlined confirmation process. You see, we've observed a what, we've seen how they've done it, we start to understand and ask these questions of why this happened and how can we make it better. Same, for example, with feedback analysis, right? What? We gather detailed feedback on what users liked or disliked, how we look for emotional cues in their language, and why we use this information to prioritize the change that will enhance the user experience. So after launching a new feature on a social media platform, you collect user feedback through surveys and support tickets. That's the what. You identify comments expressing frustration or dissatisfaction, noting the language used to describe their experiences, the wow. Now we analyze this feedback and we deduce that users are unhappy with the lack of customization options, which leads to prioritizing improvements in that area. We've got into a why. 3 little words that can really make a big difference. So now we start summarizing this whole concept of inclusion design, right? We need to solve for one to extend it to many. And if there's one thing that you remember out of this whole talk, it's the sentence. Let's try and solve for one that we can extend to many. How do we do this? We start looking at a persona spectrum. This is such a helpful tool that really helps us stretch our imagination when we're busy working on different projects or we encounter different situations, right? We use to understand related mismatches and motivations. We cover permanent, temporary, and situational scenarios in this instance. So it's a way to really quickly foster empathy, and we show our solution can scale to a broader audience. And it, like this network that we can test this with, I'll take you through an example now, is think about friends, coworkers, family members, even a random stranger. If you've got that like self-courage to walk up to someone and be like, hey, I've got this cool thing. How do you think about this? Or what can we do about this? Like actually feel that courage to actually go out and test and have these conversations, right? And emphasize that no person ever exists in isolation. You're not the only human that's ever had this problem in the world. Even though it feels like that, someone else has always had the same problem. And that means we can actually start generalizing a little bit in the sense of, a lot of people are feeling this way. This isn't an isolated problem. How do we actually start solving for this, that more people don't go through this feeling? So if we look at this persona spectrum and we take, for example, right, if I need to design for someone in a situational environment, for example, I'm a distracted driver. I'm not looking around, or I'm like, I'm not focusing on the road, or I'm a bartender in a very noisy environment. I can use this situational case that I need to solve for, but I can actually go through to a permanent form of disability and go and see, okay, what about a deaf person? How do you navigate the world around you? How do you actually make the best out of the situation? And how do you navigate this complex scene? I can then transfer these skills over to my situational product solution that I'm busy designing for. Or the distracted driver, someone with a temporary, in most cases temporary. Sometimes that's a permanent situation as well. I have a cataract and I have impaired vision. So how do you navigate the world around you, and how do you actually find these shortcuts to make a difference? And I can take that over to my situational environment. As a summary, I've been really trying to rush this to stick within an hour, so for us to open up to some questions. But to summarize this, how do we strengthen these muscles of inclusion, right? We need to understand. We need to actually go out to feel. We need to hear what other people have to say, and we need to practice the ability to relate to them, even though their situation or experiences are not the same as us. And only through that do we grow. And that is my summary for inclusive design. So I'm going to pause here for any of the questions that have come up. Actually, I'm going to just go back to my screen as well so that I can see what's popped up. But yes, happy to take any questions.
I have a ton. I always have a ton. But yeah, so anyone who, like anyone watching, like, yeah, please pop questions in the text chat. We'll bring them up on the screen and John can get straight to them. Liesel, I'm curious whether you maybe want to start us off with one, because I have a hunch that once I start going, like, that's the end of it.
Look, yeah, I also have a ton of things, John. The first thing I want to say is thank you, because I think this is applicable to life, not just design.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping everybody else got that as well. And the other thing is, I think this persona spectrum you showed at the end, I like it because I come from an operational background. So I live in like, yes, you can tell me all these things. So, but how? Show me how. So I think that's like, we always get to this point and then we say we could do a gazillion follow-up talks from this. So I don't really have a question. It's just, I wanted to say how applicable to life the talk is and to design. But then also, I'd like to see some more practical examples, I guess, of how we can apply that into design.
Don't worry, I'm going to grill him now. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I knew you were going to
Go
come
ahead.
with that.
So, well, let's get straight into it. So, and I'd be super curious, kind of like I'm super interested in your responses, because like, I think we come from such different worlds. It's interesting when I first reached out to John, like I think we had a moment where we were like how is it possible that we haven't crossed paths yet? And I think the reason being, like, he finds himself like in a lot of corporate spaces, and I kind of avoid a lot of corporate spaces. But anyway, so I'm curious, so for example, like Liesel and I can chat about this, and we can kind of try and get a sense of, like some answers to some of the stuff. But like, we move in a lot of the same circles. So I'm super excited to hear kind of like some other perspectives. So I think the first thing from my side is just that so WebAIM kind of do a survey every year where they kind of look at specifically web accessibility. And for the last 5 years, so you have basically like WCAG, I always pronounce it as WCAG. So WCAG, like, and year by year, compliance is dropping across the board. So, like, we are practically every year moving further away from accessibility. So I think first and foremost, I'd be curious what your kind of take would be on that, like kind of how you would make sense of that, because I don't think anyone, like, and this is what makes it tricky for me, and it's like, I don't think anyone would say that accessibility doesn't matter and inclusivity doesn't matter. But yeah, like I don't want to start diving into that immediately. And so the other thing as well is I like your. This is more a comment than a question. I like your approach, like about thinking very holistically about this, and not just being like, cool, here are the 5 steps that you can do. And it's being like, I like your approach of being more mindful in terms of the decisions that we make, because Steve Barnett, who does a lot of work in accessibility, he was kind of one of the founding members of what eventually became FEDSA. He always used to say that it's accessibility is actually more about what you don't do, and inclusivity is more about what you don't do and what you actually do. It's not something you can add on afterwards. It's more, you get more mileage by preventing yourself from doing actual things than learning new things. So so I kind of like your approach, that it kind of ties into that as well. But like, to come back to the original question, I'd be curious what your take is on the fact that accessibility across the board, and by definition inclusivity, seems to be getting worse year on year.
I think thanks, Schalk. That's a relevant question, because I think the sad reality of the fact is that no one can deny that, I don't want to feel included, or I don't want to feel that I can't access this, right? But we all, when we come back to these busy deadlines, this thing needs to go out now. It needs to happen now. If we don't approach this and get this out to market, someone else is going to do it, and we're going to be on the back foot. I've generally noticed the pattern that this becomes the nice to have to think about then. They're like, we know we should be doing this. We know it should be inclusive, but you know what? It speaks to more people right now. We'll get back to these. Let's just get it out. And the problem is we never cycle back to actually approach the people that we've neglected. And the problem with this is, I see, like, inclusion and accessibility, so it's the foundational element on which you build the solution. Now we've pivoted, we've created this MVP. Everyone's happy, business is happy. Ooh, now things aren't going as well because not many people are engaging with this. Now we're thinking about things that are important, like inclusion and accessibility, because I've spent all this money. Now no one's using this thing. What's wrong? Now we try and go back and retrofit inclusion and accessibility, and that's too late. Now we need to completely revamp this thing that we've built, because our foundational element of this was actually lacking, because time, money, capacity constraints. If I think about the South African market, like in Europe, the WACG standards and accessibility, it's actually enforced and policed, right? So there are actual people that make a living by scanning websites, by scanning solutions and reporting these accessibility problems. In our South African market, that doesn't happen. So although we look at it, we like turn the blind eye and we continue with our day-to-day livings. And the thing is, it's general nature and human behavior to take the shortcut. Like, we are all hardwired to take the easy path. If we know we should be doing this, but no one's going to come and stand behind our shoulders and be like, but why did you not employ this? Or why is this not accessible to this human? We're going to continuously fall into this trap where, nice to have, I'll preach the philosophy of including it. I'm not actually finalizing that in my design or having that visible in my product. I'll spin up some nice generic ChatGPT personas to explain that we have thought about this, but there's nothing that actually tangibly shows that it's actually making an impact. It's going to continuously drop. And it takes people to advocate for this in every meeting. When we say we are the voice of the user, we always need to take, and I try and approach it from the step of, but I'm a user myself. Even though I'm designing, wouldn't this irk me if it was this way? A nice tangible example is we're busy designing a solution for maternity care. And I'm sitting in the meeting and we're like, yeah, okay, we need to focus on mommies and we need to focus on babies. And I'm like, okay, but what about the family that's affected? What about granddad and grandpa and mom, like all of them, their experience around this? What about dad? How's he feeling about the situation? What are the different subsets of mommies we can find? What about single moms? What about moms who lose a baby? What about same-sex moms? What about moms whose dad is not around? All of those things, right? And that's when I see you start slowly bringing in these ideas of thinking about these different accessibility metrics. But there's not a score sheet that someone's going to keep you liable to it. And I think that's our fight as designers, to actually constantly enforce the fact that, listen, this product needs this. Even though if you get shot down 5,000 times, you're like, guys, it's important to look at. And sometimes, and you'll see that sometimes the maturity in the team grows and they actually take emphasis on this. Not everything always pulls through to reality, which, I mean, kills all our souls a little bit when you see that. But it's by actually just bringing this topic to the table, because in general, it's a difficult thing to talk about. It's easier for us to ignore it. and have the facade that we care about it than actually engaging with this and calling and keeping ourselves accountable to the fact that, listen, yeah, we've created this, but we've actually created some evil in the world as well by not doing these things. And that's a difficult conversation to manage, especially when you're sitting in a corporate environment. Even with the startup space, I've invested so much money into this. Now for you to come and tell me it's not 100% correct or something's broken here, we tend to avoid those conversations. And I think that's one of the largest contributors as to why you see these numbers actually declining.
No, 100%. And so for me personally, I'll maybe say how I've, because that's something that worries me a lot. So not, like so. So I have a very long history of like mental health and stuff, and like mental illness and so forth. So for a very long time in my life, it was just, it was very hard for me to live a functional life. And I think I got a very direct experience of like how hard it is to navigate like a world that's not set up for you, a world that is like I'm in a much, obviously this is now years later, I'm in a much better place now, and I'm on medication and whatever, so now I can somewhat like navigate the world like somewhat competently, but like it's like yes man, that was really tough, like just figuring out, like, because I think when I started working I just couldn't work a full week. I just didn't have the emotional, and like just navigating that space. So, and I think the other thing is as well is I didn't study tech. My background's actually in visual arts. So for a very long time in my life, I didn't have a lot of money. And one thing that I very distinctly remember is, like, so I just had like one of those entry level smartphones that you just get at like Pep for like 80 Rand or whatever. And I couldn't use my online, I'm not going to name the bank, but I couldn't use my online banking services because the OTP would, like, the app would be so slow on the device that the OTP thing would just time out before I could actually proceed beyond that point. So but then the question is, like, okay, cool, like, so it almost feels like convincing people that these things are important is like half the battle. But then even once you get there, it's like, okay, cool. So how do you now even do this in the context where, like, let's be real here. Companies are optimized for profit. Like it's like I think like we have to be real insofar that like companies don't inherently care about design. They don't inherently care about users. They care about users insofar that it's a proxy for money. End of story. Like I think like we have to have this, because otherwise we tend to dive into too idealistic waters, and I think then we run the risk of, like, I often talk about, like, someone else had a much better word for this. I sometimes call it human centered washing, which is like kind of like greenwashing or whitewashing, but just like human centered washing. I think I actually see Liz is in the chat, and I think she used a term for it once that I really appreciated. But so this is a very long leading tangent to a very specific question, and that question is: at what point do you just have to play hardball? At what point? So do you just have to say that I hold some weight in this organization? I see Kate is in the chat as well. Like, Kate is, I'm going to bring your comments on the screen now. Kate does a lot of work in accessibility as well. Glad to have you here, Kate. Sorry, I'm interrupting myself. Okay, so but the question is, at what point do you just have to play hardball, and you have to be like, I hold some power in this organization. I have some work, like I provide value, and like the team want that value from me, and I set conditions, and I say that these are the conditions for me to be part of the team. End of story. Like, this is it. I'm drawing a line here, and I've done that a couple of times in my life with mentorship and supporting of the team, because I do feel that organizations, if they just follow their own incentives when it comes to supporting actual humans that are actually just working in tech, like, people are going to work over hours, people are going to get burnt out. Like, so I think I've been in a lot of positions before where I've like, okay, like, this is the conditions in which I'm willing to be part of this team, and like, these are non-negotiables, and if they are not honored, like, I'm leaving. Like, so my question is, like, do you think there's a place for that type of thing? Like, almost like, I don't want to say threat, but like, is there a danger of getting too lost in trying to make a good case for accessibility, where the answer is just literally to be like, you have your incentives as a business, you want to make money, whatever, but like, I'm gonna be an obstacle for you here, and this is what I care about, and I'm gonna make sure it happens, and this is it. I'm not budging on this.
I like your question, because it speaks to a lot of how I approach this as well, because I always like to think about the fact that when you engage in a company and you're an employee, you have a value proposition and a set of morals and values that you uphold. And you kind of like have that in the company as well. And sometimes it's a nice dream that's sold to you, and you get there and you realize, these morals are actually corrupt and they don't align with mine. So yes, as much as it's not the greatest thing to go, like, you see the first little inconvenience and throw your hands up and be like, this isn't the place that I want to be. I don't want to do this at all. You can try and like motivate that, right? And be like, listen, this is how I think about it. Bring that viewpoint in there, because there's a whole lot of relatability that we find when we engage people on an equal level. And I've seen this in a lot of the I&D work that I do as well, especially talking about pride and LGBTQ rights. So when we start talking about these things, people are like, now you're calling me out, now I'm uncomfortable, how dare you point your finger at me? We shut ourselves down. Same thing when we fight about accessibility in that way. When we become in a position where it's a finger pointing exercise and like, I'm better than you because I think this way, people aren't going to budge and see the mutual ground on that. So as much as you don't need to be attacking in that instance, when you find yourself in an organization, and this has happened to me as well, where went in, thought our values and morals were aligned, seeing that I see it as a superpower that you have every day. Like, you have the ability to actually make a difference in someone's life through what you're doing. Not a lot of occupations can say that, right? Like, you directly affecting what other people go through, and you play a role in making their life easier on a day-to-day. And if you see this not aligning, and like, you've really motivated and advocated for it, use a lot of data. Like, data and analytics is a huge tool. Marketing analytics is a huge tool for you to leverage, and actually put the data in front of an organization. Because again, we recognize and understand when we see numbers, we don't always work on assumptions. You have the knowledge to understand what should be happening as a designer. You understand these complex patterns, these important elements around inclusion and accessibility, but you get the data set to actually support that and have that conversation. Sometimes you'll see the company tries to engage with it a little bit, and they try and take baby steps in improving that. Then you can see, okay, this is a relationship that we can actually work with, and we can try and grow this. Not going to happen overnight. Every single day, you're going to have to put that effort in and nurture this plant and grow it. If you find yourself in an organization where this just isn't happening, and you literally feel like you've tried every single avenue, just get shot down, your soul is busy dying, at the end of the day, and I mean, this is the way I look at this, I can then use my superpower to be enabled in a different organization that values this, and I can drive value there. Because it also gets to a point where if you are a human that are passionate about these things, if you actually want to make this drive, and you blocked at every single direction, that kindness that you spread, or that inclusion that you spread, and principle of inclusion, can grow and be nurtured somewhere else. And I always like to think about it in the fact, if I reach no one, I failed. If I'm in this position where this organization just is not budging and enabling me to do this, that's like, I'm not going anywhere. But if I move to a different company, industry, organization, viewpoint, manager, whatever that space is that you move to, and you impact one human, that's a network that you start spreading, and you're actually trying to make that change, and it starts to see fruition. So maybe it's the millennial or centennial in me that's very much like, all right, guys, we don't align, I'm out. I do feel that, you need the courage to actually question these things. And that's difficult, right? Sometimes this means an executive member, a managing director, that you need to respectfully have the courage to get up and be like, guys, I really don't agree with this. This is where we should be going. This is what it should be doing. Give them the proof, give them the visibility. If they don't accept that or continuously shoot you down, then the choice is yours to actually maintain, to say, am I going to grow this elsewhere or not? I see, Kate, there's a lot of great question or like responses to this as
Yeah,
well, and
I'll
I mean
pop them on the
essentially that
screen now. Yeah,
so I actually used
Kate
to
has a
work for
lot of great opinions on this. Yeah.
I used to actually work for Accenture. I was part of Fjord, and like they are really, when they say they practice inclusivity and they actually really take that passionately, it's really great because you get the most insightful like viewpoints from there. And they've actually got case studies where they show the ROI of this. And I think when we start talking business language, we need to start using design, which is very like qualitative, how we feel, how we implement. It's seen and regarded this way. We all who are designers know it's not 100% this way, but that's the perception that we're fighting. If we start making that quantitative, right, and we show the ROIs of this and you prove the use cases, that's when we start changing the direction on an executive level.
It's interesting, and I think that also speaks to the different worlds that kind of we move in. As like, because I'm working in much smaller teams, and even when it's part of a big team, like it's usually kind of some small subset of like a very cross-functional team, with people that specialize in machine learning, and like, so there would be someone who specializes in product or whatever, but it's very cross-functional. It's very small teams, and I often work in instances where teams themselves have a lot of leeway and autonomy to make decisions without some like ladder in terms of carrots and sticks.
The red tape parade.
Yes, exactly. So I think, like, for me, I've had a lot of great success with, but it might also just be personalities. Like, I think I don't mind stepping into that antagonistic role if I feel it needs to happen. Whereas I think, like you rightfully pointed out, like like in a bigger corporate setting, it's very easy for you to get sidelined if it's a bit of a squeaky wheel type of thing. And yeah, so like that's very interesting. I haven't considered that. And like, would you rather take like a slower, more patient approach and actually make progress than just come in hard and just get sidelined? So I'm in the position. Yeah, go ahead.
And what makes my soul happy on that point is if it's a big corporate, the radius of people that are affected by these things, even though it seems like it's a small victory on your point and your beliefs and where it should go, it's actually reaching a very large base, which kind of like soothes your soul a little bit as well, knowing that yes, these are like micro steps we're taking, but at least now a huge industry, a huge corporate is doing things a little bit better and it's a little bit more inclusive. And those are the things that I think you should be using as the targets to actually promote this and make yourself feel like you've achieved something. Because if you take that step back and you're like, I've got these 9,000 things that we need to do to be regarded as inclusive, you're going to have sleepless nights.
Yeah, no, I get that to a certain degree. Like as a point, like I'm going to get to the text questions now in a second. It's just like, man, this is such great stuff for me. I want to like hog the Q&A. But like as a like I spoke about WebAIM as well, like quite a bit, and like, and they've kind of year after year also established that the biggest problem from a inclusivity and accessibility perspective is color contrast. And that's such an easy thing to fix. It's so easy. Like, but this is where there has to be. Yeah, I think we're also not like honest about like there are sacrifices there. Like that might mean that your color scheme is gonna be more bland. Period. Like I would challenge anyone who would say that adhering to like accessible color contrasts doesn't limit your options from a visual perspective. And
No,
because
you can do magic with that.
yes, but like I do, there is a sacrifice there. And I think we're not honest enough about that. And I have a range of other thoughts around kind of, I see the only way out of this mess as as by means of legal avenue, like because the problem is it's a bit of game theory. Like if everyone follows the rules and you don't, you have a massive advantage. So everyone wants to do it, but like if, but it's only like, so you almost need like a legal stick to be like, okay, cool, so you can just be assured that everyone needs to adhere to it.
You need the whip in the background.
Yes, exactly. Okay, but like I've hogged the conversation enough. Let's start working through these. So cool. There is a question from Nix. As a content designer in fintech, I feel limited as not a lot is being invested in accessible design. I'm fascinated by the idea of how copy and text to speech can help improve digital offerings. Your thoughts on that, John?
That's a really, really cool point, because in like what I've seen with fintechs, it's usually the nicer leeway to start playing and like testing these things, especially with your fintech startups. Like it's a trusted domain, but you have that leeway of actually like we're doing things differently, we're being a little bit new at this. And the idea of how copy and text to speech. So copy is a tough one, right? Because there's a certain business way of speaking, and again we're falling into this trap of we've always done it this way and we will do this the way going forward, or there's all this legal jargon that actually you need to adhere to, otherwise you're opening yourself for lawsuits or those misunderstandings, right? But how I see how we can start playing with this copy, and it's small steps, like let's try and fight jargon. When we see that, like we don't necessarily need to use this big word because that's the only word legally we're allowed to use. So when we see these instances happening, actually question this and be like, guys, I work in fintech and I don't understand this word. How is our user base supposed to understand this? Or it's the same what I find in the medical field. Like you are given a prognosis and a diagnosis, and it's these big words. And I'm like, okay, cool. So am I dying? Am I not dying? What's happening to me? Because I don't understand the words you're using. So I think when we play with copy, we should actually be bold and like take these chances. And like the worst that can happen is no. And that you can then use that as an argument to build off of, but actually be like, let's humanize this. Let's speak to each other how people speak to one another. Because for some reason, when we talk about money, we're all monotonous robots that use the biggest words, and we're not engaging in a way that you normally we would be engaging. Text to speech, I really think that's a great thing that we need to start embracing a bit more, because even if it's like, it doesn't necessarily need to be for someone with a physical disability, right? We're all lazy. We all don't like reading that much anymore. This is something that can enhance all of us. It's a feature that while I'm driving home and I need to do some banking, I can speak to my voice assistant and actually get this going. So I think that there's no easy solution to this, but I think the courage and the boldness that should come from this is actually start questioning these things, start bringing up the conversation, and actually don't be afraid to make that suggestion or actually show this user what this prototype could look like, and then start engaging from there. I think the worst case scenario is we preaching that we need it, but we're not delivering some sustainable examples of how this could be done.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think also to add to the text to speech thing is like the platforms we use like are actually really good at like already doing that. And like so you spoke about screen readers and stuff. And so I think once again, it's one of those things, like it's not a question. I obviously don't know the context here, but so I'm obviously superimposing a lot of my own context here. But like a large part of it is also like the platform, especially the web, is already really good at that. There's a lot of really great tools that hook directly into that. It's more a question of reading up and learning and being cognizant of the things that inhibit that, as opposed to thinking like, all right, let's add text to speech to our platform. Like let's go and Google text to speech solutions, or we hire someone to come as a specialist and come like you're going to get much better return on investment by just Googling what are things that impede text to speech,
Yep.
so
I've added a descriptive header tick. I've got text to speech, because that's again it's making it a tick box exercise, which is the wrong approach. And I think that's what we should challenge. We should challenge the automatic generic tick box.
Yes, and also to your point of screen readers, like I've been trying to teach myself to use a screen reader now for a very long time. I've actually spoken to some of the people at Blind SA to maybe like, because they have courses where they teach people to use screen readers and stuff, to just like as an able-bodied person actually sign up for those courses, because I'm at the point where it doesn't really inform my design decisions that much, because I don't know what is just the actual thing that I'm building not being accessible, and what is just me sucking at using a screen reader. Because whenever I use a screen reader, it just feels like, oh, this is so frustrating. I don't know. So but yeah, that's something I can highly encourage, is for people to just do a quick Google, try and use a screen reader, even if
And
it's
the
just
easiest
a little bit.
And the easiest approach to that is we understand exclusion and marginalization once we are placed in that position. Up until that point, we aren't sensitive to it. So actually actively find ways to put yourself in that uncomfortable situation so that you can feel these feelings and empathetically respond to how we solution it, instead of just assuming I understand what it feels like.
Yeah, and that counts for like even the tools that we use. I think people that work in the tech world, we are definitely like kind of way above the median when it comes to actually the devices that we have at our disposal. Like we tend to have machines that are pretty powerful. We tend to have screens that are pretty big. So I think there's also like a lot of that sometimes gets skewed because we work in tech. We tend to like have better hardware than the average person. Yeah.
And again, that's where bias comes in, right?
Yes, 100%. And so there's a follow-up question from Nex, which is, effectively what we spoke about a couple of minutes ago is like, how do you get people higher up to invest resources in this? And I think I've also, yes, go ahead. Like I'll have you respond to it.
This is like, it's always a money conversation when these things come up. And I think that's something that we're immediately afraid of engaging on because, I don't have the financial model to back this up. But how I've done it, and like anyone who knows me well, I'm like no squalm walking up to an exec and be like, all right, can we have 5 minutes? We need to have we have a bit of a talkie to do. Because I think the first secret is destroy this idea of hierarchy in your brain. We're all people. We all struggle with the same things. That exec is a human that has like he, she, they can find themselves in a temporary or situational disability as well. They're not immune to these problems. And I think finding, again, a non-finger pointing way to do this. So how I've approached this in the past and in the healthcare as well, like this move to healthcare has been a very interesting move because there's a whole lot of these things that are happening, but we resort into it. We've always done it this way. And the way that I've found the best is to approach this is really find a neutral approach and not be like, not going, you guys are wrong for not doing this. Shame on you. That's horrible. Like, again, they're going to shut down and actually going with small baby steps and not like imposing this whole new concept to this human who may be a CFO that just looks at the financial statements and the profitability of the thing and the sustainability, right? Because remember, you're speaking to them in a different language. You're coming from a different approach. And again, we can't have that conversation with us being the subject matter experts and this human that we're trying to educate. So try and bring that content down. Get an example of being like, I've noticed we do something in this way. Actually, after thinking about it, it could be a little bit exclusive, or it is exclusive. Maybe let's start thinking about it in this way. What do you think about this? How do you think we can implement this? So you actually do that empathetic user testing with them, and you get them to actually understand the problem from an equal point of view, not a, how dare you not do this, and how have you not done this for 20 years? That's bad. That's the approach that I've found works the most. And again, draw the picture. Don't let them assume the picture. Go to them with the proposal, go to them with the solution, go to them with something that's been put down on a page that you can both point and look at the same thing and not expect them to visualize what you're thinking.
Oh, man.
I've got a question. Sorry, a final question from me, but I must apologize. I need to pop off soon. I've got a child writing exams. Are we making it a money conversation? Or how much more money are we talking? Is that just where everybody goes with it? Because they don't really want to address it? Because when you did your presentation during the talk, I felt like the things that you were doing, user testing, you had your 3 items lined up, can't recite them now. It felt to me like those are typical design exercises. So you will be doing these things in any case. So is it just like a fallback that everybody goes to, like it's more expensive? Because if you're going through those motions in any case, it's just really changing the thinking about it.
This brings me back to a very big pet peeve And I think it's because of the fact that when we talk inclusion and we talk these things, it's regarded as more time is needed to research this. We need to spend more budget to send and recruit people and test this. And I think that's where the money conversation comes in, because people are like, design phase is scoped for 2 weeks, or discover phase, and we're going to go and figure out what's the problem, and it's quick and it's easy. Sometimes if we do these things properly and we really engage, that means it's a very long discover phase, or there's a lot of UX research that's involved. That is, and if you do it properly, you recruit participants, you have third-party vendors, because people who are trained to moderate this and actually are very skillful on not imposing these biases and all of that, that is a costly experience and it's a costly exercise. And I think that most of the times, because in cases where you might have a company that's not design mature, or you don't have that strong fundamental understanding of design and the values that it brings, is now you think about, okay, cool, I have this resource, or I need to get this vendor to supply this for me. It's something that we're already doing. It's like, I don't actually know the tangibility of what this is going to be and how it's going to come out. I know I should be inclusive, but it's going to cost so much upfront, and I'm afraid to make that leap. So I'll rather resort back into we'll just do it and we'll get it done with, and we'll come back to it, because then maybe I may have gotten it right in the design phase and I don't have to come back to it. That's the little hope we all hope for, instead of investing that large amount of capital and actually understanding the user, actually understanding the base that we're designing for. And to be fair, when it comes to design, it really is a costly experience, and it is expensive to get these tests set up. It's expensive to get these experts, recruit people. No one's just going to walk up to you and tell you how they feel about something. They're all going to be like, "Boss Schalkwyk," or "How am I feeling about this?" or "What is my incentive to do this?" And all of those need to be budgeted for. And I think inherently, it's another bias that we all fall into that trap, that it's going to be too expensive. What is this giving me? How do we do it? Instead of actually going, you know what, guys, we can start this so small by just asking the people who sit in this building how they feel about it. We can take 10 minutes and walk down to our colleague and ask, how would you do this? How do you feel about this? And I think it's that bias that we need to break first, to be like, yeah, baby steps. We'll get to our fancy project where we do this big bunch of research and we get all of this solidified. But let's actually make baby steps and just actually go ask someone what they think about it, knowing that this human isn't just going to blindly conform to what we're saying, and they could actually challenge us a little bit. And it's having that level of openness and courage to actually go and have someone break your design. So my first design mentor always told me, you find the human who breaks your design the fastest and you ask them why they broke it. And it's seeing that as the exercise that doesn't have to be so costly, versus it's going to cost X amount of money over X amount of months, and it's such an inflated budget, and this is why we're not doing it.
There's always a practical first step to take forward.
That's, I have to say, go ahead.
And I was like, it takes, the longer you build up that reputation of design and the reputation of what usability testing and research does, and if you find yourself in that organization and you take these baby steps and you slowly start building this up, that becomes a much easier conversation to have in the long run, because you've demonstrated the return. So I've also noticed a lot, and again, this is very much in the corporate setting, show me the investment upfront. Show me the return. I need to tangibly see what this is going to improve for me to justify this cost. And if you do it in these small steps and you use it incrementally, that conversation becomes much easier to navigate and manage, because it also becomes a trust-building relationship within the organization for what this exercise, research, accessibility actually delivers to you as an organization, and the scalability and transferability of it. Because it doesn't mean we spoke to one human and we're never going to be able to use this information again, or we don't understand our users. So it's that transferability as well. It's not just a once-off big cost.
Can I ask a scary question? Sorry, Liesel, maybe
I'm going to jump off at that point.
Before
I'm so
I ask
sorry.
the scary question.
Before the scary question, I'll run.
Bye.
Thank you. I'll catch up with you later.
Cheers,
Thank you.
Liesel. Oh man, this is so great for me, and it's challenging me in so many good ways, because I tend to, as mentioned, I tend to come into this very like guns blazing, like antagonistic, like in terms of, listen, you guys, like we have to do this, otherwise I'm gone. So this is really great for me in terms of challenging some of my ideas around that. But so the scary question I wanted to ask is, do we really believe that it makes business sense to prioritize this stuff in terms of opportunity cost? Like, I don't know. Like I might be brave enough to say that I don't think I'm convinced by that. I want to believe that. I really want to believe that, like, you can make a financial case that people are going to be like, hey, we can actually make more money doing this. I'm not convinced opportunity cost wise that, like, yeah, like, I don't know, like, and like, and if you disagree with that, then how what would you then, even if that's not the majority of cases, that it doesn't necessarily make business a sense, maybe say it's the minority, but what do you still then do in those cases?
It is
So,
it's
so the
a
answer to
deep
me is
question.
like, have punitive measures where, like, it doesn't make, like, like, there's also, like, that's why we have laws, because there's a lot of stuff. If you just, like, leave organizations to just follow their incentives, they're just going to spill oil everywhere and pump poison gas. Well, they're already doing that, but, like, probably even more blatantly than they are doing now. So, you have to be like, okay, no, like, if you do these things, you're going to get punished, because, like, your business incentives go against this. Yeah.
I've like toyed with this problem a lot as well. And to be fair, even if you look at how we as a society see things, it's much easier to just do for the general. But most people will use this. I don't really need to care about this because
Yep.
business-wise, it's reaching most of them. The ones who can't, sorry, your problem, find a way. And it's a sad reality of how we as people are, that is our default. And I think the difficult part is every single one of us actually acknowledging that that's how we see things, and actually deep down we do default to that. So proving the business value it's not an easy thing, right? And it's a very subjective matter, because if you are trying to prove this business case to someone who's not encountered this problem before, it's like it's an uphill battle that you most likely are not going to win. But how I try and approach these things is the fact that you try and find that common ground where someone has gone through that. Because have you noticed how the voice of social media and the voice of, ooh, you did something and we saw it and we're calling you on it, is a big motivator for change? Because now when companies aren't inclusive, something happens and it blows up through social media or the power of people's voices. Then all of a sudden, we are so sorry, press releases, we've rectified this problem. And I think a large thing that we can use is actually that voice of giving people the opportunity and the platform to actually raise these problems in a way that it gets seen. That creates a lot of this peer pressure. And sometimes peer pressure can be a good tool to use to enforce change. And actually have people keep people accountable for these things. Because up until the point where we have legislation that states, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you will be penalized in this way, and this is how we'll impact your basically your income. I don't see people natively actually enforcing this holistically. And the big thing with IND and accessibility as well, it is so broad. It is so difficult to cater for everyone and to make sure everyone is included in that. But what I have found really works is if you engage with people who have these decision rights in an organization, or they're close to a department that can enforce a little bit of this change, speaking to people and understanding the things that they're passionate about. Because in most cases, that passion also drives some sense of inclusion that you can enforce. And you actually use that mutual understanding of, actually, I don't really care about babies that go to the ICU and parents can't meet them, because I don't care about that. It's never affected me. But my granny is blind and she's struggling to navigate the world around her. And I actually have to spend all this time looking after her, and it's so difficult. Or a good example is my best friend's gran passed away recently, and she got to the point where she had to use a sippy cup. And my friend was like, for a grown woman with so much pride, having to resort to using a children's sippy cup, that killed me. And that invoked this change that we need to try and make a difference in this space. So it's finding those shared human commonalities. And this is difficult, right? Because this means you need to put yourself out there and actually try and find these and use those tools to try and navigate this, to impact and influence the people around you that have the ability to enforce this change. And I mean, I know that sounds like a very wishy-washy response, but that's unfortunately the nature that we find ourselves in, because we don't have the law that says you will be penalized if you do this. We all have this ability to switch off that empathy and be like, oh, I know I should be doing it, but I'm skating away without doing it. But you will find these humans that embody that. And I think that's our role as in designers, is to actually bring these difficult conversations to the front, actually make this something that's more like accessible and discussable. And by doing this and taking these small steps, instead of choosing the easy path of just ignoring it, that's how we start invoking this change.
Yeah, no, it's like, and I wouldn't hold my breath for legislative change, because who's the biggest culprit here? You know, like, and I'm saying this as someone that has done work for National Treasury. You know, like, so, the government is in no position to enforce this, because like what was it, like, for a very long time you couldn't do your tax returns online. You had to use like Internet Explorer. That's the only browser that worked. You know? So like I wouldn't.
It's a you problem, not a me problem.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath. Like I think the South African government has a very, very like long way to go to even get basic accessibility in the digital services. So I can't imagine them enforcing these laws, like, if they are so far removed from even meeting them. But like, so like, someone that I look to quite a bit is kind of the gov.uk stuff, with GDS. So the UK government's digital stuff, they do amazing stuff. Like, they have a lot of actual resources on this type of thing. And one thing I do feel is that, you know, like, as Liesel asked about like money, you know, like, do you need to add more money? I don't necessarily think that, because once again, I mentioned that it's more about what you don't do than what you actually do. It's more about like knowing what things are going to be problematic. But one thing there is that it does raise the skill floor a bit in terms of people that can work on things and so forth. You can't, that's where it becomes tricky. Is you need people that are more senior than your budget probably allows. And because if you look at like GDS, for example, you know, like their designers, their interaction designers, like they're like the type of people who do like talks and presentations and write books, you know. So one that I really like is the form design patterns by Adam Silver, you know, and like, so that's kind of your level of skill that you're working with. So I think that's more tricky, is that but my hope is that eventually, you know, over time, like, people just become more skilled, and the kind of the floor rises a bit, especially now that tech isn't just free money anymore.
And
now
it's
probably
engaging in these conversations. It's like, it's planting that seed that every single human who listened to this talk tonight is going to go back, think about this in some way, how this becomes applicable to their life. And that's how you start growing this momentum. It's actually just giving it a voice, because at the moment I feel a lot of it is, again, it's a tick box thing that we all know we should do, but we never talk about what it actually does and how it actually affects a human. And that's how we grow that common ground.
Yes, but so
it's very altruistic.
No, sure, 100%. But I think, like, even if this is the first time you're even hearing about this thing, this isn't even something you've considered, I do think there's value in maybe that approach as a starting point. So a good place to start is A11Y project. You just Google it. They go out of their way to make a lot of this material like really accessible, give you like cheat sheets and stuff you can use and so forth. But I think the other thing as well is, like, a lot of the documentation on this is so technical. You know, if you try and read the WCAG, like, it's not a fun read.
You need an English degree.
100%. Like, talk about accessibility. It's so inaccessible even to like people who have actual college degrees. Yeah. So Kate made a good point. She mentioned that NVDA is free, which is the screen. It's the one I use as well. I think so. On Windows, I use that. I think Mac has like something built in that you can use if you just want to test out like screen reading and so forth. See what that's like. So she has a lot of great stuff here. Color contrast. Let me see if there's anything else. No, it's just okay. I would encourage anyone who's watching this video to just have a look at the text chat. Kate like shared a lot of like really great stuff in there. Just like give that a quick scroll. Yeah, and I think we should probably start looking at closing this up. I'm curious whether there's anything else you maybe want to mention or chat about before we end this, John.
It's just kind of like leaving that idea of really have the courage to bring up these discussions. You may be the most senior or the most junior designer when it comes to that table that you're sitting around. But just remember, when you talk about these things, you're actually talking about something that's way greater than yourself or anyone around that table, to be perfectly blunt. And by bringing up these things doesn't make you like, there's no such thing as a stupid suggestion when it comes to these things, because in essence, it doesn't matter what you bring up and how you bring it up. You're actually, again, creating awareness for things that people don't take into consideration because it's not a challenge that they face daily. And by actually bringing those up, not being shy to talk about it, like Schalk, I love the fact that you spoke about your mental health struggles, right? That takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of vulnerability to talk about these things. And a lot of the times we don't talk about these things because we either have shame or fear or the idea of being pushed aside that comes up when we want to make this change. And it's actually really empowering, the fact that I'm doing something good by talking about this, and I need to recognize that in my soul and me as a human, that took a lot of courage and vulnerability and power from my side to bring this up and talk about it. And in some cases, use myself as an example of how I can actually foster this change. And I think that's the biggest thing I want you to remember from this talk. It's like, it's really okay and really encouraged to bring up these things. You are never too junior or too small or too marginalized to have this voice. And it's actually by using that voice that you try and make this change, and you start this momentum of actually creating a better future where we all feel included and accessible.
Jeez, what a way to end. But yeah, no, that's great. I also just want to quickly add to that as well. Like, like sometimes you just can't gain traction. And and that's okay. And it's like, like sometimes it's just like it's, if you were to really press a higher up or a manager or whatever, like like it would effectively come down to they actually don't really care. They wouldn't say it in that many words, but like I think there are just circumstances where people, like, you have to just accept that and move on. And like that's one of those things. And then maybe you find yourself in another team at a later point and you try again and they're very receptive to it. I think it's very easy to give this a try, to be kind of like invigorated almost by like, yeah, and I often see this, people are like, accessibility, yeah, and then they come to work and it's just like no one really cares, and then that's very demoralizing. But it's like, like sometimes that's just how it is. And then like, but sometimes you're kind of at a place where you're at the right place with the right people, and there's and you can be like, hey, this is actually a thing, let's maybe start looking at this a bit. And it's a lot of times it's also just about like just keeping up like motivation to actually push this.
Yes. And remember, everyone's in a different journey and they're on a different phase of that journey. So just because they're not receptive to it at the moment, it means that they find themselves on their journey in a space where they aren't too receptive or they aren't open to it because it hasn't impacted them yet. But and I mean, there's a few times that you've had that conversation, and even I've had that conversation, and it gets shot down. And the thing that I really just try and do myself to motivate myself as well, because I do feel people who do this work, you really do need to spend a lot of time motivating yourself and finding value in what you deliver, is saying, even though it's not relevant to them right now, somewhere along the line, something is going to happen to this human. And the way that you've delivered this note 2 days, 5 days, 6 years ago will trigger a thought. And that's when this momentum starts to grow. So even though you feel like it's not important today, every single one of us is going to get into a position one day where this is important and matters to us. It's just going to take a different form.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's amazing. Thanks so much, John. And
thanks, everyone.
Amazing evening to everyone else. And cool. Hopefully we'll chat again soon. Cheers.
Cool. Lovely. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.